I'm an American kid from Arizona with the name Jihad. Growing up, there wasn't a lot of diversity in Phoenix, so you were either black, white, or Mexican. So people, because of my darker skin, just assumed that I was Mexican with an exotic name, Jihad, maybe Oaxacan or something. But my growing up, my mother being Christian Methodist, Caucasian American, my father being an immigrant from Jerusalem, he was Palestinian Arab. I was told growing up that I was Palestinian. And, I grew up a happy-go-lucky kid in Phoenix, always outdoors, playing sports, and, lived in some ways a very pleasant childhood. But I was told, about Palestine and my father's connection. He was born in Palestine in 1938. And, he experienced war and occupation and left when he was just 17 years old to live the American dream here in the United States. But I didn't really know about the history of Palestine. I was 10 years old when I first went and visited my family there. And it was a traumatic experience. I'm just going to be raw. It was difficult. I remember being in the hotel room in Jordan, and when I had my rude awakening, my father went to get the paperwork in order for us to cross the Allenby Bridge into Israel. And my mother pulled us aside and gathered us together and said, don't tell your father, he'll be upset, but I have to tell you. There's no such thing as Palestine. It was, taken over by Israelis, and now it's called Israel. And I had never even heard the word Israel growing up my whole life in Phoenix. So it was kind of a gut punch. I didn't know what that meant, but it was, it seemed ominous. And then, sure enough, we crossed the border. We visit family in Hebron, which is, the largest Arab city outside of Jerusalem. And my cousins, and I have a large family there. My father was one of 17 children, one of 12 children. His older brother, who just passed away last week from COVID, was 87 years old. He had 17 children, and, many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So I have a lot of cousins, and many of them lived in the city of Hebron, where Abraham, our common forefather, is buried. And we were, a family of six. We were 5 children at the time. We're a family of 7, sorry. And we rented a place, and at that time my cousins were still in school. And so while they were finishing up their school year, we spent the summer there in 1981. And we saw school children walking to and from school. And now this is before any peace agreements. This is before even the first Intifada. It was just straight up occupation. And I would watch these school children, middle schoolers, elementary school kids, walking with their books to and from school. The soldiers would come, line them up, and start beating them. It was difficult to watch. And I didn't know how to process it as a 10-year-old. And I became filled with anger. I didn't know how to deal with that. And I experienced much worse throughout my 3 months there. So when I returned to Phoenix, I continued my life, but that was something that was burning inside of me. And it wasn't until in later years when my parents were going through a divorce and I started asking the bigger questions, what is the source of inner peace and love, and how to overcome anger, that I began my spiritual journey. That took me around the world. I went to the deserts of Saudi Arabia. I traveled to study language in Iran, and ultimately went on to focus on Islamic studies, and I found beauty in connection to God and through the pathway of Islam. And to come full circle, it was only after I became an imam in which I gathered together with people like Guibord, and who we traveled together to the Holy Land, but rabbis also, who shared with me the outrage, that I was able to transform my anger that was not directed or didn't have any place to motivate good, a good outcome, or to utilize the energy. It was not directed. It was through the connection of these good-hearted people of faith that I was able to understand and hear different narratives about the connection to the Holy Land. And it was the bravery of Rabbi Neil Kumas Daniels and Rabbi Chasen, and who's a rabbi at Leo Beck Temple, and Leonard Bierman, may God have mercy on his soul, and others who were people who loved Israel and were connected to the land and loved the Jewish people, but were not afraid to also speak up against injustice, and who felt and shared with me this anger towards injustice. And so my righteous indignation then was shared by other people of faith, but it had a positive and constructive outlet where it wasn't condemning a people, but it was something that was shared with all of humanity, and it was about educating and speaking out a bit about against the injustice so that transformation can happen. My wife similarly is from an occupied land. She's from Indian occupied Kashmir. She was born there but raised in the Midwest. She's Kashmiri. And so our children, when we have 4 children, and so when we were raising them, we said, how do we want to raise our children? We both experienced the trauma when we were younger, and we said we do not want our children to face that quandary on what to do with outrage. So we said, let us, to the best of our ability, and we are privileged to be able to protect them from that reality here in the United States. Given our station and our class and everything else, we have that privilege to protect them. And it wasn't until last year, to conclude my story, where my son, who's now 19, but he was 18 at the time, he said, I want to go to Palestine. We had not taken them to Palestine because we didn't want them to feel that. And so I said, I don't think you're ready. I was taking him to school one day here in Los Angeles, and I stopped at a red light, but I pulled a little bit too far into the intersection, and some school kid walking by, a teenager, hit the hood of my car and, made a gesture and was clearly angry. So I turned to my son and I said, don't let other people's anger bother you. And he said, Dad, I don't let it bother me. He said that what you did, was a minor thing. It didn't justify that reaction. He said, he's probably just having a bad day. And I said, son, I think you're ready to go with me. And so last year, I took him with me to Palestine and to Israel, and he was mature and able to process all of the injustice that he saw on that trip. So one famous Bosnian mufti put it this way. He said, as human beings, we have intellect and we have our emotion. Angels have intellect without the whim, and animals are whim and emotion without, although they're pretty smart animals out there, without the free will at least. He said, if we truly utilize our potential as human beings, we can rise in rank above even the angels if we allow our intellect not to squash our emotion and our anger and our outrage, but to guide us in choosing what to do with that. Thank you.